It has been a very interesting week in Australia. Australia has been beset, or was beset last week and the week before and the week before that by the Peter Layman case. You would know that it's their cause celeb. I don't know if we've ever really had anything like it in New Zealand. You have to go back to the Bill Such spy trial. I would have thought to do something that was so all-consuming, and everybody seemed to have an opinion on it. But they've had other issues over there in the last wee while. And joining us to talk about what's been happening in Australia and what applicability it might have to us living in New Zealand is our Australian correspondent, Jaqui Lane, and she joins us now. Jaqui, you returned to Australia yet, or are you still enjoying yourself in the land of the long white cloud?
No, returned last week, so kind of right back into the thick of it. But,
now,
had a nice break at home.
Now, you, of course, have your own publishing company in Australia, in Sydney, based in Sydney, writing particularly corporate histories. What projects are you involved in at the moment?
Oh, look, I've always got a couple on the go. I'm writing a book for a company here called Santos, which is a big oil and gas company, and a couple of family business histories. And I also mentor business people on how to write and self-publish their own books. So I'm working with about 15 people on their projects. So really busy, actually, which is great.
One of the things I have noticed, and obviously you've gone and made a career, and a very successful career from that publishing business in Australia, and therefore, intimately got to know most of the business leadership of Australia as a consequence. But I'm interested if there's a different... One of the things I look at, Jack, is that New Zealand companies go to Australia, and you often see them, leaving relatively quickly with their tail between their legs. Is there a different business mentality in Australia than in New Zealand?
Oh, look, I don't think so. I think that, but it's a different market, so what works in New Zealand may not work in Australia, and to take a kind of slightly different view, I was once told when, we in a different age and stage, we were looking at, expanding into America, and someone said to me, well, don't think of America as one market, it's 52 states. And I think the same applies here. Just because something works in New Zealand, it's not necessarily destined to work here. And because of our state structure, there are, and this will come out and probably later in our conversation about something completely different. Different states have different laws, and you probably have to, if you're going to go Australia-wide, you have to deal with any number of layers of federal bureaucracy, regulation, state, and then in some cases local. It's a challenging market, and you have to have reasonably deep pockets to get market share and grow here.
I was just thinking of the Michael Hills of this world, and the Kathmandus, and I think there's another one. There's a child's thing that Pumpkin Patch, Warehouse.
But Pumpkin Patch is no longer. Michael, Hill. So there were exceptions, and they, so there's some New Zealand companies have done very well here, but it's like any market. You can't assume that if it's going to work in New Zealand, it will work here.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough too. Hey, listen, we've just had a speech this morning in New Zealand given by Winston Peters as our Minister of Foreign Affairs, in which he has really ramped up the rhetoric to do with New Zealand's relationship with China, and in China in particular. The background of that, and I don't know if you've caught up with it, Jack, is that what's his name? Bob Carr, who I think was
Bob Carr. Yep.
Is he a New South Wales Premier? Was he? Was that his background?
He was a former New South Wales Premier for about 10 years, I think, and has had a long-standing and deep intellectual, interest in China. In fact, he launched a book for a client of mine not so long ago. About China. He's been involved with China on many levels for many decades.
He's threatening now to sue Winston Peters, our foreign minister, on the basis of remarks that Winston Peters made as foreign minister a couple of days ago on national radio here, or New Zealand Radio New Zealand, essentially, Winston Peters, Bob Carr had to go at Peters, I understand, and Peters shot back something along the lines of, that Bob Carr was in the pocket of the Chinese government, or words to that effect.
Yeah.
Is that the perception in Australia of Bob Carr, that he is too close to the Chinese?
I don't think so. I mean, and Winston called Bob Carr a Chinese puppet, which is pretty. It's not a eloquent way of describing him. And Bob, as I said, has had a long-standing intellectual interest in Chinese history, and so that's very well known. He's headed up, some university-related things and some business things. So, Australia has a huge business relationship with China. So, I guess my perception, and perhaps others here, is that ramping up that rhetoric is really pretty simplistic, given that, Australia's economy depends in a long way, shape or form for China. That said, our current Treasurer is changing the foreign investment review requirements to make it harder for Chinese investment into Australia. So, there is a group, or I guess a feeling at some level that, and it was always thus, that we love the Chinese investment and we love them buying our iron ore and stuff like that because it supports our economy. But there's a degree of trepidation, I guess, about the potential for compromise with Chinese investment and Chinese activism in Australia.
However, having said that, Bob Carr, I think, was the first to fire the first shot. It was to suggest that any involvement of New Zealand in AUKUS would be, quote-unquote, fragrant methane-wrapped bullshit. And as a result of that, he's obviously opposed to AUKUS from, at least philosophically or at least politically, in Australia, the UK and the United States, in an alliance which is pretty much, I would have thought, aimed at Chinese foreign expansion, isn't it?
Pretty much, although no one here would actually say it like that.
Really?
So
wouldn't they be that honest?
No. And it's a very delicate thing. So, Australia, several years ago, under the Morrison government, China basically stopped any exports of wine to China. There are a whole range of basically trade sanctions it kind of put on without saying they were trade sanctions. China is a huge market for Australia in a whole range of things. So, Australia's been in the deep freeze with China in a whole bunch of trading areas for several years. Whatever we might say about the Labor Party in other areas, Penny Wong has done a pretty stellar job, really, in resurrecting a more a calmer trade relationship. So, but there's this real friction between the trade relationship and the defence security relationship, as you would expect. Australia, largely depends on China, exports to China for its resource income. It fundamentally been supporting Australia's quality of life for the last several decades. Yet there's this completely different kind of security, defence relationship. It's challenging.
Well, it's a bit more than challenging, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I see overnight that the Solomons have elected their Prime Minister, Solomon Islands, who is much friendlier to China than to the West, and has reconfirmed a relatively secret military and diplomatic relationship between that particular Pacific Island nation and between China. There is a perception in Australia, isn't there, that China is in actual fact militarily gearing up rather than just economically for some sort of control, domination, influence in the South Pacific too, yeah?
Oh, I think it's more than a perception. I think yesterday China used water cannons to prevent Philippine boats going in some area. I mean, China is very active in and around the South China Sea and in the Pacific. And it's building, runways on particular, building up runways on a particular island in some contested area in the South China Sea. There is no doubt that there's significant concern about China's growing military presence using economic development, the building of ports or roads or stadiums or whatever across the Pacific. And Australia and New Zealand really has dropped the ball over the last several decades in terms of providing support, economic or otherwise, to the Pacific nations, and left the door open. And as those nations have kind of, I guess, awakened to possibilities, they've gone and sought investment or support elsewhere, and China was willing to give it. So there's a major security and defence issue.
But I guess
China.
the problem with Chinese investment, though, Jack, isn't it? It comes with particular strings attached, and they seem to be, and also in loans. Many countries, Sri Lanka is a good example. Yeah.